The fifth thing is to worship God wholeheartedly. You and I, we have been created by God to worship Him. In the first talk, I mentioned doxa, that we are created to glorify God. That's the chief end of man. And we have been created by God to worship Him. The Bible actually repeatedly urges us to wholeheartedly love and obey God and to worship Him. And we are to worship Him wholeheartedly. It's possible that we can pretend or practice hypocrisy when we come to worship God, because God can look into our hearts. In 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 41, God complains. He says, even while these people were worshiping the Lord, they were serving their idols. It seems like these people were experts in multitasking. On one side, they were worshiping, they were singing hymns. On the other side, they were servicing their idols. So as we grow older, our sense of worship should grow deeper. A useful definition of worship is one given by the late Archbishop William Temple, the Anglican bishop. He says, for worship is the submission of all our nature to God, and it is the quickening of conscience by His holiness, the nourishment of mind with His truth, the purifying of imagination by His beauty, the opening of the heart to His love, the surrender of will to His purpose, and all of this gathered up in adoration, the most selfless emotion of which our nature is capable, and therefore the chief remedy for that self-centeredness which is our original sin and the source of all actual sin. It tells us that worship is actually focusing on God, who God is and what He is like in His relationship with us and what He has done for us and is doing for us. And unless our worship focuses on God, we will end by default worshiping ourselves and all that we have made with our hands and minds. So it's all so important that whenever we gather to worship God, we focus our attention on God. Sad to say, a lot of our worship these days are man-centered rather than God-centered. So in our hearts, as we come to worship God, we should be aware of God's presence. When you come to worship God, instead of chatting away before the worship begins, why not turn your attention to focus on God, who is the very focus of our worship? Quieten your heart, experience the presence of God, and prepare your heart to worship God. We seniors, I think we have to exemplify this. In our own personal lives, as we learn to worship God in the privacy of our hearts, in the quiet times that we have, I think that spirit of worship will carry over into the various daily activities that we have, and into church also as we come together to worship God. As we focus on the very characteristics of God, we notice how every aspect of God's character actually influences, affects, and transforms every aspect of our lives. For instance, God's holiness affects our conscience. God's truth transforms our mind. God's beauty purifies our imagination. God's love changes our heart. And God's purpose aligns our will to God's will. So you notice that everything about God, as we come into God's presence and as we explore God's character, our own character changes and is transformed. And that's what happens in a worship situation where sinful man meets with the holy God. Something that happens by virtue of God's grace and mercy. And as we grow older, we should aspire to worship God in spirit and in truth, as Jesus says in John 4:24. God is looking for worshippers. God is seeking for worshippers who will worship Him in spirit and in truth. What a wonderful thing to actually die while you're worshiping God. One of the primary things that we will be doing in heaven, if you read Revelation, is that we will be worshiping God. So better get used to it, that we should practice with sincerity and with devotion something that we'll be doing forever in God's presence, something that we'll be doing in heaven. We should be learning how to worship God. I know different people have different ideas and wishes about how the exit from earth should be. One of the most popular ones is this. Christians tell me that their desire and dream and wish, aspiration is that when they go to bed one night, and then God will take them home. No need to go hospital, no need to have all the drips, no need to be in ICU, no need to be diagnosed with cancer, no need to suffer a stroke. You have your favorite dinner, you go to bed, and then you go in your sleep. That's very nice. But how about aspiring to be taken home while you're worshiping God? Isn't that marvelous? You are in a state of worship, you are in His presence, you worship God, and God takes you home in that moment. Some preachers, including myself, our dream is this. The moment God takes us home will be when we are preaching God's word. From the pulpit, there you are faithfully preaching God's word, and then God takes you home. He says, time to come home. And then you collapse, and up you go. And you are faithful doing the very thing God has asked you to do. So whatever our dream is, what a wonderful thing it is to be caught up into heaven as we were worshiping God. The Apostle John in Revelation 1, he was worshiping on the Lord's day. And then he was spiritually caught up and he had this vision of heaven written in the book of Revelation. He had a very special preview of what's going to happen in history. Though he actually came back to earth, but in his old age, he had this wonderful experience of being transported in his worship to see things that are glorious. That's one thing that we can aspire to, that on earth, as we worship God, we are transported to the heavenlies. And then one day, as we worship God, we make that final journey. The final transport comes to us, and we are moved from here to there permanently. What a wonderful thing to do. And we seniors, we need to think about these things. We need to make sure that our lives are being prepared for life in heaven. We need to think more and more about life in heaven. We need to think more and more about the reality of God, and that we are very soon going to be with Him. We are going to stand in His presence. So as we sing, the things of earth will grow strangely dim as we turn our eyes to heaven. We need to experience this more and more as we age.